Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time to a London that's somehow stranger than a group text with your in-laws, the roaring 1920s. But this isn't the glamorous, jazz hands, Gatsby London, you know. No, tonight we're crawling under the wobbly dining tables, peeking into smoky working-class kitchens, and opening those mysterious tins at the back of the Victorian pantry to discover the weirdest foods people ate in 1920s London. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe flip on a fan for that white noise, wiggle yourself into your softest pajamas, and get cozy. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what Londoners actually ate back then? Was there anything besides tea, beans, and existential dread? Did people really eat jellied eels by choice, or was it just a dare gone wrong? How did anyone survive a dinner menu that included boiled sheep's heads, dripping sandwiches, and desserts made from stale bread and lard? Would you risk your life for a taste of mock turtle soup? Or is that just what you call canned ravioli after midnight? And most importantly, could you last a day eating nothing but what the average Londoner faced a century ago? Could you choke down boiled cow heel, stargazy pie, or something called potted meat without Googling whether it's supposed to fizz? How did people cope before avocado toast, oat milk, and the sacred drive-through? Well, congrats! You've just woken up in 1920s London. Your wallet's thin, your appetite's braver than your common sense, and you're about to face a breakfast that's more mystery than meal. Good luck. You roll out of bed and greet the London fog. Breakfast is waiting. A slice of fried bread sopping up beef drippings, a pile of baked beans, maybe a few slippery kippers staring up at you. This is not your continental croissant moment. Here, the morning meal is both a dare and a declaration of war on your arteries. Let's set the scene. You're in a narrow, drafty kitchen in 1920s London. The wallpaper is peeling, the kettle is whistling, and there's a suspicious dampness to everything, including your socks. You can practically hear the city waking up outside, trams rattling, a distant horse clopping, the groan of someone realizing it's Monday again. But inside, all is chaos and cholesterol. On the table sits the star of the show. Fried bread. Not toast, heavens no. This is yesterday's bread. Cut thick, dropped straight into a frying pan, and cooked until it's golden brown and just shy of crunchy, every air pocket saturated with beef dripping. If you squeeze it, you could probably lube a bicycle chain. In a modern kitchen, this would be a scandal. Here, it's breakfast, and the smell is so rich it could probably buy you a round at the local pub. Then there are the beans. Not the dainty, lightly seasoned beans you find on trendy brunch plates, but baked beans swimming in a sauce so sweet and thick, it might qualify as a dessert in other countries. The beans don't just sit there, they announce themselves. They're hearty, hot, and somehow manage to get on absolutely everything else on your plate. Every bite is a commitment, and if you drop one on your shirt, you're wearing that badge all day. But wait, sliding across the plate comes the real test of character. The kipper, smoked herring, split open and left to languish in a cloud of salty smoke until it's simultaneously flaky and oily. The flavor is somewhere between, I just licked a pear, and this is how real people build character. The kipper's stare is unrelenting. Some Londoners swear by it, others swear at it. Either way, it's your job to pick out the bones and pretend it's not looking at you. Eggs may make an appearance, but forget the Instagram perfect sunny side up. These eggs are scrambled, boiled, or fried in that same beef dripping, their edges curling up like they're trying to escape the plate. They taste like history, and a little bit of last night's dinner. Let's not skip the meat. A rasher of bacon is standard, thick, salty, and usually more fat than flesh. If you're really splashing out, you might get a sausage. But in 1920s London, sausage is a broad church. Sometimes it's pork, sometimes it's bread, rusk, or whatever the butcher swept off the floor that morning. Texture is a suggestion, and you'll never bite the same sausage twice. If you think this breakfast is heavy, wait until you get to the black pudding. Yes, the legendary blood sausage, made from pig's blood, oats and fat. Black pudding is what happens when you look at leftover ingredients and say, let's not waste that. The first bite is confusing, the second is alarming, and by the third, you're either a convert or making a mental note to move to France. Now, imagine washing all this down. Forget artisan coffee. The only thing dark and rich in this house is the tea, brewed strong, served in a mug the size of a flower pot, and dark enough to hide whatever floaties survived the kettle. If you're lucky, there's milk. If you're not, there's still tea, and you will like it. Let's do a quick modern comparison. Ever tried a detox smoothie after a night out? This is the exact opposite. Eating the full 1920s breakfast is like building your own internal sandbag wall against the coming day. It's not about flavor. It's about fortification, and possibly about daring your internal organs to revolt. Your arteries? They're trembling. Your stomach? Both grateful and confused. But here's the thing. You're ready. This breakfast was designed for people who worked 12-hour shifts, walked everywhere, and considered running water to mean dashing outside in the rain. As you sit at the wobbly kitchen table, sopping up stray beans with the last triangle of fried bread, you realize two things. 1. Breakfast is less a meal and more a survival strategy. And 2. You have at least 3 more meals to go today. Good luck. Because in 1920s London, if breakfast didn't kill you, you probably had a fighting chance to make it to lunch. Step right up to the East End pie and mash shop. In a bowl, shimmering under the fluorescent lights, sit the city's pride and joy. Jellied eels, chopped, boiled, and set in a wobbly, savoury jelly. They look like something your cat coughed up. But in 1920s London, this was dinner and a show. Let's paint the scene. You shuffle into the shop, dodging a crowd of hungry locals and the persistent cloud of vinegar fumes. The air hums with chatter, boots scuff against the cracked linoleum, and somewhere in the corner, a piano pounds out a tune that's seen better days. The menu isn't long: pie, mash, liquor, the parsley sauce, not the fun kind. And, of course, the infamous jellied eels. You order a serving, trying not to look too suspiciously at the twitchy teen behind the counter who's got eel slime under his fingernails. Now, jellied eels are exactly what they sound like. Imagine a freshwater eel caught in the murky Thames, chopped into thick, rubbery chunks, then simmered for hours in seasoned water. The boiling releases enough gelatin to set the whole thing into a quivering, translucent jelly once it cools. If you thought aspic was weird, try eating it when it's actively staring back at you. The first spoonful is a leap of faith. There's a faint whiff of the river, earthy, fishy, with a hint of, did something just move? The texture is a 3-act play. The jelly is cold, wobbly, and alarmingly slick. The eel itself is firm and chewy, sometimes giving way with a soft pop that lets you know you've hit the skin. It's a dish that never lets you get comfortable. Just as you start to think, maybe this isn't so bad, you get a mouthful of bone or a surprise splash of fishy brine. Still, there's an art to eating jellied eels. Locals swear by a dash of malt vinegar and a healthy shake of white pepper. Purists eat it cold, straight from the bowl, while the cautious pick around the suspiciously opaque bits and try to avoid eye contact with their meal. If you're new to the dish, you'll spend a lot of time second-guessing your life choices. But if you grew up in the East End, you'll tell anyone who listens that it's an acquired taste. The same way people say that about black coffee, blue cheese, or apologizing to your neighbor after a late-night argument. Why eels? That's the real question. In the days before Deliveroo and supermarket fish fingers, eels were everywhere. The Thames teemed with them, slippery and plentiful. They were cheap, packed with protein, and impossible to overfish. Londoners could count on them for a meal that filled you up, stuck to your ribs, and, most importantly, could survive days in the open air without turning into a biohazard. Jellied eels, the original shelf, stable snack. It's not just about eating, it's about tradition. Families would crowd into eel shops on Saturdays, kids squabbling over the biggest pieces, grown-ups dousing their bowls with vinegar like they were putting out a small fire. Street hawkers sold paper-wrapped portions to workers heading home from the docks, and rumours swirled about which shop made the best jelly. Thick, thin, clear, or suspiciously grey. There's a weird kind of pride attached to jellied eels. Eat one, and you've earned a badge of honour. Eat two, and you're basically a local. By the third, you're immune to peer pressure, and possibly to taste itself. It's the sort of food you bring up at parties. Not to impress anyone, but to warn them. Don't complain about pineapple on pizza until you've had cold eel in a bowl of fish jello. If you're comparing to modern times, think of it this way. It's not so different from that one friend who insists on kombucha, or the co-worker who's way too into fermented soybeans. Every city has its edible rite of passage. Jellied eels just happen to be London's most slippery handshake. By the end, you've either developed a weird fondness for the stuff, or you're vowing never to trust a wobbly food again. Either way, you leave the shop with a full stomach, a new respect for your digestive system, and a lingering suspicion that somewhere an eel is getting the last laugh. And as you walk home through the London fog, you realize something important. It takes a special kind of resilience to eat a meal that stares back, jiggles on the spoon, and makes your teeth work overtime. But if you can survive jellied eels, you can survive anything, at least until lunchtime. Craving a snack between shifts? Grab a slice of bread, slather it with beef drippings, literally the fat from a roast, and slap it shut. Congratulations. You're now eating a dripping sandwich, a comfort food so greasy, it doubles as hand moisturizer. Let's set the scene. You're standing in a cramped 1920s London kitchen, your stomach rumbling, the coal fire barely holding on in the grate. There's no fridge humming in the corner, just a chipped larder and a bread box that's seen more drama than the local theatre. Butter? That's for special occasions, weddings, Christmas, and maybe when you win the pools. But drippings? That's every day. A byproduct of Sunday's roast. Sitting in a mug, thick and golden, just waiting to meet its carb-based destiny. You reach for a crusty, slightly stale loaf. Nobody's throwing bread away, not in this household, and slice off a doorstop chunk. The dripping has settled into layers. A soft, white fat on top, and lurking underneath, a dark, meaty jelly known as the goodness. The family legend is that the best bit is at the bottom, but really, you're just playing Russian roulette with calories. Spread thick, the dripping glistens in the weak sunlight, soaking into the bread until it glues your fingers together with a film so slick you could moonlight as a mechanic. The sandwich is cold, because everything is cold, and it's dense, chewy in a way modern bread never is. The first bite is a rush of pure, savory satisfaction. Salty, beefy, and inexplicably comforting. Like a memory of every roast dinner you've ever had, concentrated into a single, slippery moment. There's no crunch, no fancy textures, just soft bread and smooth fat. Maybe a sprinkle of salt, if you're feeling decadent. Some families add a layer of meat jelly. Some go wild and toss on a few pickle slices for health, but the purists scoff. Why ruin perfection? This is poverty's answer to brunch. A snack invented by people who believed in thrift, practicality, and getting through the day on as few coins as possible. You eat it standing up, hunched over the kitchen sink, because dripping sandwiches are not to be trusted around clean clothes. One wrong move, and you'll be wearing that snack for the rest of the week. Children love it, mostly because it's forbidden by doctors and dentists everywhere. It's the kind of food that sticks with you, literally and emotionally, long after the last crumb has vanished. So, why dripping? For most Londoners, it's about survival. Meat is precious, expensive, and usually reserved for Sundays, funerals, or when your uncle comes home from the Navy. But the drippings, the savoury runoff, the fatty leftovers from roasting beef or mutton, those are democratised luxury. You save every drop, let it cool in a tin on the windowsill, and scoop out a bit whenever hunger or nostalgia strikes. And make no mistake, nostalgia is half the flavour. Ask anyone who grew up in London before the age of supermarkets, and they'll go misty-eyed talking about dripping sandwiches. They'll reminisce about rationing, about queuing for bones at the butcher's, about a time when nothing went to waste, and making do was both a necessity and a skill set. For some, it's a taste of childhood. For others, it's a badge of honour, proof that you know how to squeeze comfort from the leftovers of comfort food. Let's compare. Today's snacks are engineered for crunch, flavour balance, and mouthfeel. Dripping sandwiches laugh in the face of modern nutrition. They're honest, they're unapologetic. They are a love letter to calories and a gentle threat to your cholesterol. And yet, there's a strange satisfaction in eating a dripping sandwich. It's the kind of working-class magic that says, we might not have much, but we'll make something out of it. It's simple, it's filling, and it's a culinary dare to anyone who thinks avocado toast is daring. Sure, your arteries might file a complaint, and your hands will smell like beef for the rest of the day. But for a brief, glorious moment, you're full, you're satisfied, and you understand something about resilience. Because in 1920s London, you didn't just eat to live, you ate to remember, to endure, and sometimes just to get through the shift. And if you could wring happiness out of a slice of bread and a smear of Sunday's leftovers, then you were richer than you realized. Now, go wash your hands. Seriously. For the adventurous, or simply the hungry, tripe, yes. The stomach lining of a cow, served with boiled onions, was a staple in 1920s households. It's slippery, chewy, and smells like someone boiled a rugby ball, but at least you can brag about it later. Now, let's paint the scene. It's a rainy Tuesday in a cramped East London flat. The window panes are sweating. The kitchen wallpaper is doing its best impression of modern art, and a battered pot bubbles away on the hob. The star of tonight's meal? Tripe. Not steak, not roast, but the part of the cow that spent its former life as a sort of digestive trampoline. You open the pot, and a cloud of steam hits you in the face, a fog that carries with it the unmistakable scent of opportunity. And onions. Lots and lots of onions. They're not just for flavour. They're there to mask, to soften, to do the heavy lifting that salt and spices couldn't always afford to do. If you squint, it almost smells comforting. If you don't squint, It smells like a school gym bag left in the rain. Tripe, you see, is not a meal for the faint of heart. The texture alone is a test of willpower. Each bite is a negotiation. The first, tentative chew brings a soft squeak, like biting into a deflated, bouncy castle. Then the slippery texture kicks in, and suddenly you're wishing you'd gone for the bread and dripping. But you push through, because in 1920s London, waste is a sin and protein is gold. What does it taste like? That's the million-pound question. The answer: it tastes like whatever you cook it with. On its own, tripe is bland in a way that feels like a cosmic joke. But simmer it long enough with onions, a splash of malt vinegar, maybe a knob of suet if you're feeling flush, and suddenly it's a dish that clings to your ribs, or maybe just your teeth. This isn't luxury food, it's survival cuisine. Tripe and onions is what happens when necessity runs headfirst into resourcefulness. In an era where meat was rationed and every penny counted, offal was cheap, abundant, and could stretch to feed an entire family. The local butcher would sell you a pound of tripe for next to nothing, and if you asked nicely, might even throw in an onion or two for luck. You didn't eat tripe for the taste. You ate it for the calories, the minerals, and, on a good day, the story you could tell your mates down the pub. What's for dinner? Tripe and onions, mate. And if you're lucky, we'll have it again tomorrow. It was a badge of honor, a culinary rite of passage, and a secret handshake among anyone who grew up working class in London. How do you eat it? Slowly, with plenty of bread to mop up the gravy, and as many onions as you can handle. Some families added a splash of Worcestershire sauce, or a dollop of mustard for courage. Kids either learned to love it, learned to fake it, or developed a mysterious lifelong allergy to anything slippery. The truly unlucky ended up with leftovers in their lunch pail the next day, the smell haunting them through school like a ghost of dinners past. Tripe and onions has that strange power to make you both proud and slightly embarrassed. It's the sort of meal that proves you're tough, resourceful, and able to handle anything life throws at you, even if it's mostly connective tissue and onions. In modern terms, it's the culinary equivalent of doing your own taxes or fixing a leaky faucet. No one enjoys it, but it's character building. Compare it to today's food scene, and you'll see how far we've come, or how far we've fallen, depending on who you ask. In some hipster restaurants, tripe is making a comeback, served in tiny, ironic portions and paired with artisanal pickles. But back in the 1920s, it was served with no fanfare, just a big plate, a cloud of steam, and the hope that tomorrow's dinner might come from a part of the animal with less backstory. And when you've finished the last bite, survived the texture, and cleaned your plate, you know one thing for sure. If you can handle tripe and onions, you can handle just about anything. Or, at the very least, you've earned the right to order chips tomorrow. When times are tough, dinner gets creative. Enter bread and dripping. Cold congealed fat spread on a thick slice of yesterday's loaf. It's like margarine, if margarine was invented by someone actively feuding with flavor. Let's set the scene. It's a damp evening in 1920s London. You're back from a long day spent on your feet, maybe shoveling coal, cleaning houses, or wrangling 3 kids and a sack of laundry. There's a chill in the air. The gaslight flickers in the hallway, and the kitchen is just warm enough to fog the window with your breath. Dinner needs to happen, but there's nothing waiting in the oven but a vague sense of disappointment. Enter the dripping jar. The dripping jar lives on the windowsill or at the back of the larder. A chunky mug or crock filled with the collected runoff from every roast or stew your family's managed to afford in the last month. It's a badge of thrift, a symbol of stubbornness, and a reminder that every scrap counts. Peer inside, and you'll see 2 layers, the solid, white, waxy fat on top, and underneath, the jelly, a mysterious, meaty, quivering ooze that parents promise is the best part but children instinctively avoid. You grab a loaf of bread, not the bakery fresh, crusty marvels you see on social media, but a squat, dense hunk you bought 2 days ago for a few pence. You cut a thick slice, soaring through the chewy crust and hoping there aren't any unadvertised surprises lurking inside. Then, you spread a generous spoonful of dripping right on top. The fat softens just enough to melt into the bread, making each bite rich, savory, and suspiciously lubricated. If you close your eyes and squint, it almost feels luxurious. Almost. The first bite is cold, silky, and unexpectedly filling. It's salty, a little beefy, and leaves a thin film on the roof of your mouth. A sensation somewhere between comfort and a gentle threat from your cardiovascular system. The bread itself is more vessel than treat, absorbing the fat and lending a little chew to the otherwise slippery affair. If you're lucky, you get a streak of the jelly, which tastes intensely meaty, like concentrated stew, but with the consistency of a nervous handshake. This is dinner, not by choice, but by necessity. For working-class Londoners in the 1920s, bread and dripping was the fuel that kept you moving through endless shifts, ration lines, and gloomy afternoons. There's no pretension, no garnish, and definitely no apology. If you wanted to dress it up, you might add a sprinkle of salt, a few slices of raw onion for crunch, or, on special occasions, a dab of mustard to convince yourself you're having a culinary adventure. You didn't eat bread and dripping because you were seeking new flavor experiences. You ate it because it was cheap, filling, and didn't require cooking skills beyond spread with knife. Children would rush home from school, hoping for sweets, and instead get handed a thick slice smeared with fat. It's a flavor you never really forget, no matter how many decades and dietary guidelines come between you and your childhood. For some, bread and dripping meant comfort and togetherness. Families gathered around a scrubbed wooden table, passing the loaf and trading stories about who'd had the hardest day. For others, it was a culinary low point, a dish remembered less for nostalgia and more for its uncanny ability to reappear in childhood nightmares. Either way, it was a rite of passage. If you'd grown up on bread and dripping, you earned a certain badge of toughness, a secret handshake among people who knew how to stretch a shilling and wring comfort out of leftovers. Let's be honest, modern snacks don't stand a chance in this league. Your protein bar is a dessert by comparison, and even the most unadorned toast looks like royalty next to bread and dripping. There's no clever branding, no claims of health benefits, just unvarnished survival, one greasy slice at a time. And yet, there's something quietly heroic about it. Bread and dripping is proof of resilience, creativity, and the ability to find sustenance and even a little comfort in the unlikeliest places. It's the edible equivalent of patching your socks or reusing last year's school uniform. Practical, resourceful, and just a little bit rebellious against the odds. So you finish your dinner, wipe your hands on a napkin that's really just an old shirt sleeve, and wonder what tomorrow's meal will bring. Maybe there'll be a bit of cheese, or, if the butcher's feeling generous, a scrap of bacon to toss in the pan. But tonight, you survived. You're mostly full, and you've kept the tradition alive, because in 1920s London, bread and dripping was more than a meal. It was a small act of defiance, and a reminder that, sometimes, the simplest things really do get you through. Victorians missed their turtle soup, but turtles were rare and expensive. So the mock version, using calf's head, brains, and various bits, became the poor man's delicacy. The taste? Somewhere between beef stew and don't ask. Let's drop you straight into the kitchen, where the day's special is simmering away in a battered stockpot. The aroma is heavy, beefy, earthy, and faintly unsettling, with a hint of Grandma's laundry day. You peer into the pot and see what looks like a witch's inventory. Chunks of gelatinous meat, odd bones, a handful of herbs, and the disconcerting shimmer of fat glistening on the surface. Welcome to the world of mock turtle soup, where ambition outpaces ingredients and culinary optimism is at an all-time high. The recipe is less a set of instructions and more an improvisational jazz solo, depending entirely on what was on sale at the butcher's or what could be borrowed from the local market. The main star? Calf's head. Yes, you read that right. Every piece, from cheeks to tongue to the delicate, wobbly bits you'd rather not identify. The head is boiled for hours until it yields a rich, sticky broth, thick with collagen and the faint echo of childhood regrets. As the soup simmers, you toss in whatever you can find. Carrots, onions, a limp stick of celery, maybe even a bay leaf if you're feeling extravagant. And, crucially, hard-boiled eggs, sliced and added near the end for a turtle-like texture, at least in someone's fever dream of culinary accuracy. If you're lucky, a splash of sherry finds its way in, giving the finished dish an aura of celebration. If you're not, well, there's always tomorrow. The finished product arrives at the table in a chipped bowl. It's a deep, muddy brown, steaming and glossy, with bits of meat and vegetables floating hopefully. You take your first bite, and the flavor is complicated, rich, savory, surprisingly hearty, with a texture that is at once silky and alarmingly lumpy. One moment you're chewing something delicate, the next you're crunching a tiny bone. It's the culinary equivalent of a trust exercise, except the soup is the one testing you. Let's talk texture. Some bites are creamy, thanks to the slow-cooked gelatin. Others have a suspicious springiness that can only be described as medically interesting. Every now and then, your spoon dredges up a fragment of calf's tongue, and you're forced to pretend it's a gourmet treat. There's always the risk of hitting a rogue bit of brain, or, if you're really lucky, a sliver of eyeball. It's the sort of dish that demands courage, or at least a good story for the pub later. Why did Londoners subject themselves to this edible masquerade? Simple. Real turtle soup was the height of Victorian luxury. But unless you had friends in the West Indies and a private menagerie, turtles were out of reach. Enter the ingenious, slightly desperate solution. Make do with what you had, and hope nobody asked too many questions. Mock turtle soup was the original fake it till you make it, served at both grand banquets and modest family tables, sometimes with pride, sometimes with a sense of collective denial. Eating mock turtle soup wasn't just about dinner, it was about respectability. To serve it was to say, we're refined, we're clever, and we absolutely did not just boil a calf's head for 8 hours because it was cheap. It showed resourcefulness, thrift, and a willingness to bend reality until it tasted almost like aspiration. If you closed your eyes, squinted, and really believed, you could almost convince yourself you were enjoying the real thing. Almost. Let's compare to today. Mock turtle soup is basically the original plant-based burger, promising all the decadence of the real deal, with none of the actual ingredients. Sure, it's a bit of a culinary white lie, but it's born out of necessity and British pluck. Every spoonful is an act of hope, a gamble against disappointment, and a stubborn refusal to accept that you can't have what you want. You eat it for the warmth, for the calories, and for the family tradition of gathering around the table and congratulating yourselves on another successful exercise in creative menu writing. By the last bite, you're either deeply impressed or deeply suspicious, but you're definitely full. You've survived not just dinner, but a rite of passage, a bowl of edible improvisation. rich with history, thrift, and just a hint of denial. And that, in 1920s London, was enough to call it a meal. Nothing says waste not, want not, like a sheep's head bubbling away in your soup pot. Cheeks, tongue, even the eyes, everything gets eaten. It's like a staring contest, but you always lose. Let's step into the 1920s London kitchen. There's a damp chill in the air and the sound of rain on thin glass. The stove is sputtering, and you're greeted by a sight that would make most modern cooks quietly back out of the room. A sheep's head, bobbing serenely in a battered pot, its hollow eyes gazing at the ceiling, possibly pondering the meaning of life, or at least what happened to the rest of its body. The process begins with a trip to the butcher, usually at the end of the day when all the best cuts are long gone. What's left? The head, teeth and all, sometimes sawn in half to make it more manageable. A phrase that is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Back home, you give it a rinse, maybe a quick singe to remove any lingering wool, and lower it gently into a pot of salted water. Throw in a carrot, an onion, maybe a bay leaf for optimism, and let it simmer for hours, filling the house with a scent somewhere between rustic countryside and old Jim's sock. As it cooks, you begin to appreciate the ingenuity behind this dish. In 1920s London, wasting food wasn't just frowned upon, it was downright dangerous for your household budget. Every part of the animal was valuable, and the sheep's head was an unlikely treasure trove. Cheeks become meltingly tender. The tongue plumps up like the world's strangest marshmallow. And even the bits around the eyes, yes, you're eating those, turn rich and unctuous. Let's talk texture. Because this meal is not for the faint of palate. The cheek meat is buttery and soft, easy to pull apart with a fork, and rich enough to pass for something far more expensive. The tongue is a favorite for those in the know. Mild, meaty, and surprisingly elegant, if you can get past the hole it used to lick grass thing. As for the eyes, well, let's just say they're considered a delicacy in some circles. If you're brave, you'll pop one out with a spoon, wince, and slurp it down, gaining instant bragging rights and possibly the respect of your elders, or at least the family cat. But the adventure doesn't end there. Once everything is tender, you lift the head out of the pot and carve it tableside, the steam rising as you pick through the nooks and crannies for hidden pockets of flavor. There's no room for squeamishness here. In a 1920s household, you eat what's served, and you're grateful. A splash of malt vinegar or a dab of mustard on the side helps everything go down and adds a bit of excitement to each bite. If you're lucky, there's enough meat to go around. If not, you hope nobody saw you take that second helping of cheek. This isn't just a meal, it's a ritual, a lesson in humility and thrift. The boiled sheep's head is a reminder of how far creativity, necessity, and a strong stomach can take you. For working-class Londoners, this was not some exotic dare, but a staple, stretching a few pence into something filling, nutritious, and, depending on how well you avoided the teeth, almost enjoyable. Comparing it to today's dinner scene, it's hard to imagine a meal more at odds with modern sensibilities. This is the exact opposite of Instagram food. It's not pretty, it's not delicate, and it will not earn you any followers. But there's a pride in the act, surviving a meal that others might run from, making something comforting out of what the world would otherwise throw away. And at the end of the night, as the rain still patters against the glass and you scrape the last bit of meat from around the jaw, you realize you've eaten history. You've dined like a true Londoner, tough, resourceful, and just a little bit fearless. Because in 1920s London, you didn't just finish your dinner, you conquered it. And if you're still making eye contact with what's left in the pot, well, that's just dessert. Walk into any grocer, and you'll find a squat jar of potted meat, ground leftovers cooked to oblivion and sealed in fat. Nobody's quite sure what's inside. But in 1920s London, sometimes you just had to trust the process and hope for the best. Let's set the scene. It's a chilly London evening. The streets outside are slick with rain, and you're rummaging through the larder for something, anything, that isn't just another slice of bread and dripping. Your hand lands on a small jar, heavy and reassuringly greasy, with a label that's mostly faded and a lid that pops with an oddly satisfying sound. You've just entered the strange and mysterious world of potted meat, a food that's equal parts comfort and gamble. The making of potted meat is an act of pure culinary practicality. The idea? Nothing goes to waste. Into the pot goes everything. Scraps of beef, pork, maybe a little chicken, tongue or heart. Whatever the butcher swept up at the end of the day is fair game. It's minced, seasoned, if you're lucky, and cooked down slowly until it's soft enough to spread, and unrecognizable enough to spare you any second thoughts. Once it's reduced to a thick, savory paste, it's packed tightly into a jar and sealed under a cap of rendered fat, nature's original preservative. This keeps out air, mold, and, most importantly, any knowledge of what you're actually eating. Open a fresh jar, and you're met with a layer of white, waxy fat that glistens in the weak kitchen light. Underneath, a dense, slightly pinkish meat paste that smells surprisingly inviting, rich, salty, and a little bit mysterious, like a secret you're not sure you want to discover. Spread on a chunk of bread, it's smooth, fatty, and somehow both luxurious and vaguely alarming. Every bite is a mystery. Is that a hint of sage? Or just wishful thinking? Was that a bit of gristle? Or something better left unmentioned? For many families in 1920s London, potted meat was the answer to 100 culinary questions. What's for dinner when there's no money for the butcher? What goes in the sandwiches for tomorrow's lunch? What can you put on toast that won't require a trip to the shops or any actual cooking? The answer is always potted meat, spread thick and eaten with the kind of stoic optimism that only comes from years of making do. It's a dish born from necessity, thrift, and an admirable commitment to zero waste. Meat was precious, so you made every bit count. Even the most unglamorous scraps could become a meal with enough patience, salt, and a good seal of fat. This was protein that could last through lean weeks, ready and waiting in its little jar for anyone brave enough to dig in. Children, of course, had a complicated relationship with potted meat. On the one hand, it was tasty and spreadable, turning plain bread into something that almost felt special. On the other, it was a food of suspicion, because everyone had a story about that one time someone found a tiny tooth or something with a suspicious texture. For parents, it was the ultimate convenience food. Quick, filling, and requiring absolutely no fuss. Just a butter knife and a strong constitution. Compare potted meat to today's convenience snacks, and you'll see the differences are mostly in branding and plausible deniability. Modern lunch meats and spreads are just as mysterious, if a little more polished and less likely to include accidental extras. But in 1920s London, potted meat was a culinary dare, a test of your trust in the food supply chain, and your willingness to believe that what you didn't know couldn't hurt you. Usually, some families even got creative, mixing potted meat with pickles, onions, or leftover gravy to stretch it further or hide any characterful flavors. A thick layer of mustard could cover a multitude of sins, and if you added enough salt, you could convince yourself it was a delicacy, at least for as long as it lasted. By the end of the meal, you're left with an empty jar, a slightly greasy smile, and a sense of pride that you've made it through another dinner without breaking the bank, or the illusion of culinary normalcy. In a city where every penny counted and every meal was a victory, potted meat wasn't just survival. It was a badge of resilience, a celebration of thrift, and proof that sometimes you really are better off not knowing what's inside. Bon appetit and good luck. Cornwall's famous pie made it to London in the 20s. Imagine a pastry filled with whole sardines, heads poking out through the crust like tiny witnesses. It's charming, if you're into pies that watch you eat them. Let's picture it. You walk into your kitchen, still foggy from the morning's coal smoke and the evening's drizzle. There on the table is a pie that would send even the most seasoned Instagram food critic running for the hills. Its golden crust is punctured by the goggling eyes and open mouths of several sardines, angled skyward as if hoping for escape, or perhaps just hoping you'll go away. This is stargazy pie, where your dinner stares back and silently judges your life choices. The story of stargazy pie is a saga of thrift, folklore, and a generous dash of culinary bravado. Born in the fishing villages of Cornwall, this dish travelled up to 1920s London alongside Cornish migrants looking for work and, presumably, better pie options. But old habits and old recipes die hard. The main ingredient? Fresh sardines, which were cheap, plentiful, and, thanks to the wonders of British cuisine, destined for some truly odd recipes. To make a proper stargazy pie, you start by laying out a short crust or suet pastry base, strong enough to contain not just the filling but the collective existential crisis of anyone looking at it. In go the sardines, whole heads and all, sometimes even tails, arranged in a starburst pattern. The fish heads poke through slits in the top crust, gazing ever upward, as if imploring the heavens for mercy. You add potatoes, boiled eggs, and onions, all generously seasoned with salt, pepper, a pat of butter, and a suspiciously heavy pour of cream or milk, depending on how rich or desperate you're feeling. Then comes the baking, which fills the house with the unmistakable aroma of the sea, butter, and a faint undertone of, is something burning? By the time it comes out of the oven, the pie is bubbling, fragrant, and radiating the kind of confidence only a dish this visually confrontational could muster. It's a centerpiece for the table, though maybe not for the faint of heart. Eating stargazy pie is an act of courage and curiosity. The crust is rich and flaky, the potatoes creamy, the eggs soft, and the sardines, well, they're sardines. Oily, briny, and surprisingly complex, their flavors have permeated every corner of the filling. Every forkful is a reminder that food can be both nourishing and deeply psychological. You pick your way around the heads, or, if you're brave, go straight in for the full stargazy experience. The bones are small and edible, but the eyes are not for the squeamish. Each mouthful is a lesson in persistence, a love letter to resourcefulness, and a dare to the uninitiated. Let's be clear. In the 1920s, this wasn't considered odd or adventurous. This was tradition, practicality, and a bit of fun for the kids, or trauma, depending on their temperament. In tough times, the fish heads on top weren't just for spectacle. They let everyone know there was real fish in the pie, not just scraps or leftovers. It was proof of honesty and maybe a bit of pride. After all, you can't fake a pie with a dozen little faces looking back at you. Stargazy pie wasn't just about eating, it was about storytelling. Every family had a tale about the first time they braved the dish, the time someone dared to eat an eye, or the time the crust collapsed and everyone got a surprise. It's a meal best enjoyed with others, if only so you're not alone when the fish heads start to haunt your dreams. Compare it to today's comfort food, and stargazy pie is as far from a supermarket lasagna as you can get. There are no hidden vegetables, no processed cheese, and absolutely nothing pretending to be something else. This is a pie that's brutally honest about what it is and what it expects from you, namely, courage and a sense of humor. So as you finish the last bite, crust flakes on your fingers and a new respect for Cornish bravado in your heart, you realize you've just survived one of London's weirdest culinary rites. Because if you can handle dinner with a view, you can handle anything, even a midnight snack that doesn't stare back. Forget your sweet breakfast porridge. This version is salted, maybe laced with cheap cuts of meat, onions, or whatever else is lurking in the larder. It's comfort food. If your comfort zone includes slightly gritty, let's set the dreary scene. It's a drizzly grey morning in 1920s London. The sky is sulking. The fog is thick enough to chew, and you wake up to the slow, sticky bubble of oats simmering on the stove. But don't go getting ideas about cinnamon, sugar, or anything that could be confused with joy. This is savoury porridge, an ancient, economical recipe that asks the age-old question, what if breakfast could also double as punishment? The base is simple, a handful of coarse oats, the kind that could just as easily be used to patch a leaky roof. These oats are dropped into a battered pot of boiling water with a generous pinch of salt, because in 1920s London, generous means 2 pinches instead of 1. If you're lucky, you'll find an onion in the larder, soft and starting to sprout, but still willing to play its part. Dice it up and toss it in. No need to be precious about technique. This is where the improvisation begins. A sliver of suet, a chunk of bacon rind, or some unidentifiable bit of dried beef goes in, not so much for protein as for the illusion of it. Some families might scrape the bottom of yesterday's stew pot and pour the residue in for extra flavour. A hack that's both resourceful and, depending on your standards, mildly concerning. A carrot or parsnip might make a cameo, but if you spot anything green, it's probably an accident. You stir, and as the porridge thickens, the kitchen fills with a scent that's sturdy, not enticing, but not exactly bad. It's the aroma of hard times and harder resolve, like someone tried to bottle the spirit of survival and accidentally spilled it on the hob. By the time the porridge is done, it clings to the spoon with the kind of tenacity that would impress a bricklayer. Each spoonful slides out of the pot, landing on your plate with a dignified thud. How does it taste? Well, it's salty, it's warm. The oats are soft, but still a little gritty. The meat, if you can find it, is chewy, and the onion provides a rare spark of flavour, like a single working light bulb in a long tunnel. Every bite is an exercise in managing your expectations. Some mouthfuls taste vaguely of last week's dinner, others of honest effort, and the eternal hope that tomorrow there'll be a bit more bacon. You eat it hunched over the table, maybe shivering a little as the damp seeps through the walls. Conversation is minimal, because nobody wants to admit that this porridge is both breakfast and lunch. Children might eye the bowl with suspicion, adults with resigned determination. Still, there's something weirdly comforting about the ritual of it all. The way it sticks to your ribs, the way it fills you up just enough to get through the morning shift, and the way, after a few bites, you almost stop noticing the bits of unidentifiable gristle. Modern comparison, imagine overnight oats. If you took out the berries, the honey, and the hope, savoury porridge is the anti-smoothie bowl. No colour, no toppings, just relentless, honest sustenance. It's food with no room for pretension. A dish that's survived centuries because nobody could ever figure out how to make it any fancier. By the end of the bowl, you're neither happy nor sad. You're just full, which, in 1920s London, is victory enough. You scrape up the last bite, wipe your mouth, and get ready to face the fog once again. Powered by the kind of fuel only the truly determined could appreciate. Because here, in the kitchens of old London, even the porridge has character, and sometimes that's all you need to make it through another gritty day. It's exactly what it sounds like. The hoof, simmered until soft, served with vinegar and parsley. In some circles, this was a delicacy. In most, it was just a Tuesday. Let's set the scene. You arrive home after a long day dodging tramcars and the vague threat of rain, only to be greeted by a familiar aroma wafting from the kitchen, one that hints at both soup and shoe repair. On the stove, a heavy pot bubbles with promise, its lid rattling like a warning. Tonight's main course? Cow heel, also known as cow's foot. If you're lucky, your household calls it by a fancier name, calf's foot jelly. But there's no disguising the truth. You're about to eat something that was, just this morning, literally walking around. Preparation is an act of endurance and faith. First, you scrub the hoof until it's as clean as anything can be that's spent a lifetime in mud. Next, you lower it into a pot of water with onions, maybe a carrot if you're flush, and a handful of peppercorns. The whole concoction simmers for hours, turning the water cloudy and sending a smell through the flat that's half comforting, half please open a window. Over time, the tough collagen breaks down, the flesh goes tender, and what's left is a wobbly mass that could double as a prop for a low-budget horror film. When dinner is served, everyone gathers around the table with a mix of anticipation and resignation. The cow heel is ladled out in generous chunks, pale and gelatinous, glistening on the plate in a way that can only be described as challenging. Some households serve it in broth. Others cool it until the natural gelatin sets, slicing it into quivering slabs and serving it cold. Because if you're going to eat cow heel, you might as well keep it interesting. Flavor-wise, boiled cow heel is not going to win any awards for subtlety. The texture is springy, the flavor mild, with most of the heavy lifting done by whatever you sprinkle on top. Enter vinegar, sharp, tangy, the culinary equivalent of a wake-up call. A healthy pour over the cow heel cuts the richness and adds a jolt of acidity that makes you forget, at least briefly, exactly what you're eating. Parsley adds color and maybe the illusion of health. Salt and pepper are applied liberally, because cow heel on its own is about as seasoned as a blank diary. It's a dish that divides families. Some insist the wobbly, unctuous texture is the height of sophistication, a working-class delicacy packed with gelatin and minerals. Others just grit their teeth and try not to make eye contact with their dinner. Children are usually suspicious at first, but after enough exposure and a few bribes, might grow to crave its peculiar mouthfeel. At the very least, it's a change from bread and dripping. What's the appeal? In 1920s London, nothing went to waste. Cow heel was cheap, filling, and packed with the kind of protein and nutrients you weren't getting from a diet of boiled oats and yesterday's vegetables. If you were lucky, you'd get a little meat attached, a hidden treat among the chewy tendons and jelly. And the leftovers? Cow heel broth made an excellent base for the next day's stew, or could be set in a bowl as aspic, ready to confuse and delight anyone brave enough to try. Modern comparison? Think bone broth, but with more commitment and fewer marketing buzzwords. There's something strangely satisfying about scraping the last bit of gelatin from your plate and knowing you've honored every part of the animal. You finish dinner, maybe not feeling lighter, but certainly fortified, ready to take on the world, or at least the next damp morning. So, if you ever find yourself in a kitchen with a bubbling pot, a cow heel, and a sense of adventure, remember, in 1920s London, this wasn't a special occasion, it was just Tuesday, and sometimes surviving Tuesday is enough to earn your place at the table. Bright red, salty, and suspiciously bouncy, The Savoy was the hot dog's British cousin found at fish and chip shops across London. Nobody knows what's inside, but everyone knows it stains your fingers. Imagine you're strolling down a busy London street in the 1920s, drawn to the glow of the local fish and chip shop. Behind the glass, next to a heap of battered cod and a fortress of thick-cut chips, sit the Savoys, dozens of them, floating like mysterious relics in a steamy bath of hot water. They're vivid, almost cartoonishly red, as if someone challenged the butcher to make a sausage that would be visible in the dark or double as a traffic flare. Ordering a Savoy is an act of both curiosity and bravado. The shopkeeper lifts one from the bubbling pot with tongs, drops it onto your paper wrapper, and hands it over with a knowing look. Instantly, your fingers are tinged a lurid shade of pink that no amount of vinegar can remove. The sausage itself is warm, glossy, and boasts a snap when bitten, a feature more often discussed in hushed, confused tones than openly celebrated. What's in a Savoy? That's a question best left unasked and unanswered. Officially, it's a mixture of pork, or maybe beef, or both, depending on which part of town you're in. Breadcrumbs, rusk, spices, and crucially, an amount of salt that could preserve you until next Tuesday. All of this is whirled into a fine paste, stuffed into a casing, then cooked and dyed that legendary red. The flavor is salty, peppery, and not quite like anything else. More robust than a hot dog, but somehow less specific than any other sausage on earth. The texture is where the Savoy really shines, or, perhaps more accurately, bounces. Each bite has a satisfying resistance, as if the sausage is politely but firmly refusing to be chewed too easily. There's a subtle graininess from the breadcrumbs, but the overall impression is smooth, springy, and, let's be honest, a little bit mysterious. Savoys are the great equalizer of the British takeaway. Cheap, cheerful, and available to all. They are beloved by children who love the colour, respected by night shift workers who appreciate the salt, and accepted by adults who have learned that sometimes life's mysteries are best enjoyed, not solved. Served plain or, more commonly, with a generous squirt of bright yellow mustard, the Savoy stands tall as the snack of the hungry and the hurried. Eating a Savoy is a sensory event. The snap of the casing, the rush of salty, spiced meat paste, the way the colour migrates from your hands to your napkin, to your shirt, and sometimes to your soul. It's a taste that lingers, a reminder of quick meals and loud evenings in noisy chip shops. You eat standing up, leaning on the counter, while the man next to you orders a second one for the missus, and kids argue over who got the bigger sausage. Why was the Savoy so popular? Partly, it's because it was affordable, sturdier than a fish finger, more exciting than a meat pie, and less of a commitment than a whole roast dinner. Partly, it's because it was reliable, no matter what else was happening in London. The Savoy would always be there, bobbing in its pot, ready to fill your stomach and stain your fingertips. Modern foodies might recoil at the ingredient list, the colour, the uncertainty. But to those who grew up with it, the Savoy is a legend, a nostalgic bite of childhood, and a badge of survival in a world where you often didn't get to ask what was in your dinner. So, as you polish off the last rubbery bite and eye the remnants of red on your hands, you realize the Savoy is more than a sausage. It's a rite of passage. And in the grand tradition of British cuisine, it's proof that sometimes the weirdest foods are the ones we remember most fondly, even if we never quite figure out what's actually inside. Boil yellow split peas with water and salt until it forms a thick paste. Congratulations, you have peas pudding, the condiment that's somehow blander than water, but cheaper than butter. Let's imagine the kitchen. A drafty 1920s London flat, the walls sweating with condensation, the air heavy with the unmistakable scent of boiled legumes. On the hob, a battered pot bubbles quietly. The contents are suspiciously beige, thickening with each slow revolution of the wooden spoon. This is peas pudding. A spread, a side, a questionable main course, and above all, a symbol of thrift and perseverance. Peas pudding starts its humble journey as a pile of dried split peas, the most affordable protein in a city where meat is either rationed or simply out of reach for most. You measure out a cup, pick out the little stones, and drop them in a pot with water and a glug of hope. After hours of boiling, while you tend to laundry, scold children, or stare longingly at the bakery across the street, the peas have collapsed into a thick, starchy paste. Add salt, maybe a pinch of pepper if you're feeling bold, and mash until it's smooth enough to spread, but solid enough to cut with a knife. The result? A pudding that's not sweet, not savoury, but definitely present. The texture is sturdy, somewhere between hummus and wallpaper paste, and the flavour is minimal. This is food for those who value calories over excitement. If you're lucky, the pudding might have picked up a little flavour from whatever meat was boiled in the pot before it. If not, you close your eyes and pretend it did. Peas pudding is nothing if not versatile. It spreads beautifully on thick slices of bread, soaks up the gravy from boiled ham, and provides a gentle ballast to the more aggressive flavours of pickled onions or cheap sausages. It's a side dish at best, a meal in hard times, and an edible glue for any lunchbox sandwich in between. Some Londoners cut it into wobbly slabs and serve it cold. Others prefer it steaming hot. Children might poke it suspiciously, but adults, worn down by years of rationing and practical meals, consume it with the resigned acceptance of people who have made peace with beige food. What does it taste like? Mild, earthy, and oddly filling. It's the kind of dish you can eat in silence and only realize halfway through that you've finished your portion. Peas pudding is a texture more than a taste. Thick and substantial, clinging to bread or meat with the determination of someone who refuses to be left off the plate. If it gets cold, it sets up firm, slicing into clean blocks that can be stacked, packed, or, if necessary, used as an improvised building material. Every family had their own trick to liven up the pudding. A splash of vinegar, a dollop of mustard, a sprinkle of chopped herbs, or, in a moment of wild abandon, a knob of butter melted over the top. But make no mistake, peas pudding was about getting full, not getting fancy. Compare this to the spreads and dips of today. Guacamole, hummus, even Marmite, and peas pudding is a culinary wallflower, waiting at the edge of the party, hoping someone will notice its solid, dependable nature. But there's a comfort in that. It's a reminder that sometimes survival means finding satisfaction in the simplest things, making do with what's cheap and plentiful, and turning it into something that gets you through another long shift. So as you scrape the last bit of pudding onto your bread, or tuck it next to a slice of boiled ham, remember, you're not just eating to fill your belly. You're partaking in a long tradition of thrift, ingenuity, and the stubborn hope that next time, dinner might be just a little more exciting. But for tonight, it's peas pudding, spreadable, splittable, and reliably, comfortingly, almost unforgettably bland. Want something sweet? Enjoy your bowl of prunes, slow cooked until they surrender all texture. Good for digestion, bad for everything else. Now, let's step back into a 1920s London kitchen. Dinner is done, the plates are cleared, and it's time for dessert, if you can call it that. There's no cake cooling on the windowsill, no spotted dick steaming on the stove. Instead, you get a chipped bowl filled with stewed prunes, glistening darkly under the gaslight. It's the color of ambition and the texture of a bruise. This is what passes for a treat, though it's unclear whether it's meant for your sweet tooth or your lower intestine. Making stewed prunes is a simple affair. You take a sack of dried prunes, one of the few fruits that can survive both time and British weather, toss them in a pot with water, and simmer for what feels like forever. Maybe you add a spoonful of sugar if the budget allows, maybe a slice of lemon or a stick of cinnamon if you're feeling daring or festive. Mostly, though, it's just prunes and patience. The fruit soaks up the liquid, plumping until each one is a glossy, wrinkled orb that quivers at the touch of a spoon. By the time it's served, any hope of bite or texture is long gone. What you and his lie get is a sweet, sticky mass, almost a compote, with a flavor best described as earthy nostalgia. The syrup is inky and surprisingly rich, coating your tongue and hinting that you might, against your better judgment, actually enjoy this. For a moment, you might even believe you've stumbled onto something sophisticated until you remember the real reason your gran keeps pushing you to eat up. It keeps you regular love. This is the secret agenda behind stewed prunes. Their near mythical power over the digestive tract. In an era when fruit was seasonal, bran flakes were the stuff of luxury, and people still measured health by, well, regularity. Prunes were less dessert and more prescribed medicine. Children eyed their bowl with suspicion. Adults, especially those of a certain age, scooped them up with the grim determination of people who'd lived through worse. Let's talk about flavor, though. Prunes are sweet, yes, but with a musky undertone that lingers, reminding you of sun and earth and old cupboards. The longer you stew them, the deeper the flavor goes, partly comforting, partly ominous. The syrup that pools at the bottom of the bowl is almost decadent, clinging to every surface, staining spoons and possibly your memory. Serving options are limited. Some Londoners spooned their stewed prunes over bread or a biscuit for a proper pudding, while others paired them with a little custard or rice to spread out the flavor. And, let's be honest, to dilute the effects. Children might try to trade them under the table for a boiled sweet, but anyone who grew up in a house with stewed prunes knows you don't leave the table until the bowl is empty. The threat wasn't the flavor. It was the consequences of not complying. In the modern world, stewed prunes have been rebranded as a superfood, a fiber-packed miracle, perfect for smoothies and health-conscious snackers. But in 1920s London, they were humble, affordable, and more functional than fun. Dessert? Technically. Threat? Only if you had other plans the next morning. So, as you finish your bowl, wiping the last sticky streaks from the sides, you're left with a strange sense of accomplishment. You've eaten your dessert, honored tradition, and probably set yourself up for a brisk start tomorrow. In a world before probiotics and fancy yogurts, stewed prunes were the original gut health solution. Sweet, sly, and just a little bit sinister. That's the magic of old London, where every treat came with a twist, and every dessert was also somehow a dare. After Sunday's roast comes Monday's cold meat pie, leftover bits, gelatin, and pastry. Served cold, with an air of resignation, it's the original British meal prep. Let's drift into the faded warmth of a 1920s London kitchen. The weekend celebrations, such as they were, are over. The roast is gone, the washing up is only half finished, and the mood is as grey as the sky outside. Monday rolls in with the unstoppable momentum of the Thames at high tide. Breakfast is long past, and now it's lunchtime. You open the pantry, rummage through the leftovers, and pull out the solution to your culinary problems, a cold meat pie, heavy with promise and, possibly, congealed gravy. The construction of this dish is an exercise in thrift and ingenuity. Last night's roast beef or lamb, never the prime cuts, always the odd bits, is chopped, shredded, and maybe even scissored for good measure. Any slivers of fat, ends of carrot, a few rogue peas, and plenty of wobbly gelatinous gravy get tossed in. All of it is packed into a pastry case, often left over itself, before being covered with a lid and pressed down with a fork. Into the cool pantry it goes, where the flavors can mature, which is to say, where the jelly has time to set, and the pie can absorb the unique aroma of old bread, onions, and the faintest whiff of mothballs. When the time comes, you slice into the pie with a kitchen knife that's seen generations of similar Mondays. The cross-section is a marvel of British perseverance. Chunks of meat locked in a clear jelly, pockets of carrot, maybe a slice of egg. If someone in the family was feeling festive the night before, the pastry is cold, slightly tough, and every bite is a reminder that the best meals are often a little bit accidental. The taste? It's oddly satisfying. The meat is tender from its overnight rest, infused with savory jelly that brings everything together. The pastry is sturdy, designed more to keep the filling in place than to melt in your mouth. Sometimes you'll hit a surprise patch of extra seasoning or a forgotten sliver of onion. More often, though, it's the taste of memory, of yesterday's good fortune repackaged for today's survival. Serving is equally pragmatic. Cold meat pie is eaten straight from the tin, one-handed, while standing by the sink or sitting at the table with a chipped mug of tea. No need to dress it up. If you're lucky, there's a dollop of English mustard or a few slices of pickled beetroot on the side. Maybe you'll add a handful of watercress for health, but nobody's fooling anyone. It's still a lunch born out of necessity. Cold meat pie isn't about indulgence. It's about making do, stretching a Sunday roast into Monday's lunch, and sometimes Tuesdays too. In 1920s London, this was the definition of economy. Nothing wasted, everything repurposed, and every meal an answer to the eternal question, what's left? Children might complain, adults might grumble, but everyone eats, because that's just the way things are. Modern comparisons fall short. Today's meal prep is all about macros, Instagram photos, and BPA-free containers. Cold meat pie is the original. Made by hand, wrapped in wax paper, and perfectly suited to pockets or lunch boxes. It's a taste of the past, salty, rich, and ever so slightly bland, the flavor of a city that knows how to weather storms, both meteorological and financial. So you finish your slice, brush off the crumbs, and get on with your day. Maybe you dream of next Sunday's roast, or maybe you just savor the strange comfort of a meal that's equal parts resourcefulness and resignation. In a world where every bite mattered, cold meat pie was more than food. It was proof that you could make something out of nothing. And sometimes, that's the best thing on the menu. Take your standard bread dough, add currants, and fold in big dollops of lard. Lard cakes are dense, slightly sweet, and could double as a blunt weapon if needed. Picture a chilly 1920s London morning, the kind where even the pigeons look disgruntled and the wind seems to come straight off the North Sea. The kitchen is alive with activity. Someone's stoking the fire. The cat is glaring from the windowsill, and on the battered wooden table sits a tray of lard cakes, each one glinting with the promise of calories and the vague threat of dental work. Making lard cakes is a study in practical indulgence. The dough starts much like your everyday loaf: flour, yeast, salt, water, a pinch of sugar, and, if the cupboard is feeling generous, a scattering of currants or raisins. But this is where the fun and the danger to your arteries begins. Into the mix goes lard, and not a shy amount. Chunks are kneaded into the dough, folded and refolded, until each cake is marbled with layers of pure, creamy fat. Sometimes the lard is rubbed straight into the flour. Other times it's added in dramatic spoonfuls, like a baker with a vendetta against moderation. Once the cakes are shaped, thick, squat, and unapologetic, they're left to rise and then baked until golden, the currants peeking out and the lard melting into pockets of richness. When they're finally pulled from the oven, the kitchen smells both sweet and savory, a scent that says, you'll be full for days, but you'll have to earn it. Eating a lard cake is a commitment. The exterior is firm, almost crisp in places, while the inside is soft but dense, each bite heavy with the combined weight of bread and fat. The currants add little pops of tangy sweetness, bravely fighting to be noticed amidst the sea of lard. Some cakes are dusted with sugar for a touch of sparkle, but most are left plain. These are not cakes that need dressing up. How do they taste? Imagine if a scone and a loaf of bread had a child, and that child spent most of its life in a butter factory. Lard cakes are both savory and sweet, and somehow manage to feel indulgent and slightly austere at the same time. The first bite is delicious, warm, rich, satisfying. By the third, you start to wonder if you've made a tactical error. By the last, you're either ready for a nap or to challenge the nearest dock worker to an arm wrestling match. In 1920s London, lard cakes were the ultimate working-class energy food. Cheap, filling, and easy to make in big batches, they were slipped into lunch pails and handed to children on their way to school or the factory. For many, they were a rare treat, a bit of extra fuel on cold mornings, or a reward after a long day. They had the added benefit of lasting for days without going stale, their hefty texture acting as a built-in preservative. Modern snacks just don't compare. Protein bars, lightweight, croissants, flighty. Lard cakes are the original meal replacement, the kind of snack that could keep you on your feet through hours of manual labor, or, in a pinch, double as a doorstop or self-defense tool. And unlike today's snacks, there's no list of suspicious additives, just flour, lard, fruit, and enough fortitude to see you through to supper. There's also a strange nostalgia tied to them. For many Londoners, lard cakes taste like childhood, like home, like a time when simple ingredients were made to work harder than they ever should. Each bite is a little piece of family history, dense, sweet, stubborn, and, like so much of old London, built to last. So you take another bite, maybe pour yourself a cup of strong tea, and get on with the day, fortified by the knowledge that you've just eaten something that could outlast an air raid. In a world full of soft pastries and fleeting pleasures, sometimes you just need a lard cake. Tough, filling, and completely unapologetic. Rice, smoked fish, boiled eggs, curry powder, kedgeree was the breakfast of imperial nostalgia, mixing British thrift with the spices of faraway colonies. Eat it fast before the fish aroma settles in. Let's ease into the kitchen of a 1920s London home, sunlight leaking weakly through sooty window panes. The usual scent of fried bread and boiled tea is replaced, just for today, by the distinct aroma of something far more adventurous, a scent equal parts comforting and, if you're being honest, slightly alarming. Kedgeree is on the menu, and there's a sense that breakfast is about to take you on a trip around the empire, whether you asked for it or not. It all starts with leftovers, a concept familiar to every thrifty Londoner. Yesterday's rice, which would otherwise sit quietly in a corner until someone forgot it, is reborn. Into the pan it goes, loosened with a splash of milk or water. In another pot, smoked haddock simmers gently, filling the kitchen with that just caught, almost forgot aroma that lets you know the fish is really doing its job. The haddock is flaked with a fork, added to the rice along with slices of hard-boiled egg. And, for a flash of colour and character, a hearty spoonful of curry powder. The curry powder is key, imported from India, or, more likely, made in a Liverpool warehouse with just enough turmeric to make it look exotic. It turns the dish bright yellow and brings a warmth that cuts through the London damp. Onions, sautéed in butter or dripping, add sweetness and depth. A handful of parsley or coriander, if you have it, and aren't worried about impressing anyone, goes in at the end for a burst of green. Once assembled, kedgeree is a wonder of contrasts. The rice is soft and creamy, the fish firm and briny, the eggs crumbly and rich. Every bite is perfumed with spice. Though the true heat is mild enough for even the most cautious British palate. It's the kind of breakfast that makes you feel well-travelled and well-fed, even if you've never been farther than Brighton. But make no mistake, you have to eat it quickly. Let it linger too long, and the kitchen will smell like a fishmonger's apron for the rest of the week. Eating kedgeree is almost ceremonial. A big spoonful is slapped onto your plate, steam rising and curry fragrance filling the room. It's a meal meant to be shared, a Sunday breakfast for a crowd, or the sort of dish that appears at family gatherings where stories of the Raj are told with as much embellishment as the food itself. For some, kedgeree is comfort in a bowl. For others, it's a whiff of empire best left in the history books. Kids approach it with suspicion. Rice for breakfast is strange enough, but throw in fish and eggs and you've got a table divided. The bravest pile their plates high, dousing everything in extra pepper and hoping for the best. The cautious pick around the smoked haddock, aiming for just rice and egg, while secretly wishing for toast and jam. Adults reminisce about travels they've never taken, or about uncles who served in faraway places and brought back nothing but odd stories and a taste for a bit of spice. If you compare kedgeree to today's brunch scene, it's basically a DIY poke bowl, minus the avocado and the Instagram filter. It's the original fusion food, a bit of East, a bit of West, and a lot of leftover ambition. But where modern brunch is about showmanship, kedgeree is about substance. It fills you up, warms you through, and leaves you feeling both adventurous and nostalgic, even if you never really left your little London flat. And as you scrape the last flecks of yellow rice from your plate and wipe your mouth on the sleeve of your cardigan, you realize this is more than breakfast. It's a memory of empire, a lesson in economy, and, for a brief moment, the feeling that you could go anywhere, do anything, so long as you eat it before the cat decides to investigate the fish. Every granny swore by suet pudding, basically flour, dried fruit, and chunks of beef fat. It's supposed to be sweet. It mostly tastes like winter and regret. Let's set the scene. A cramped London kitchen. Condensation dripping down the window. The only warmth radiating from a kettle and the steady bubble of something hefty steaming on the stove. It's pudding night, and, as the ritual goes, the oldest family member is in charge, measuring out suet, the beef fat that's more shelf-stable than some of your relatives, scooping flour, tossing in a stingy handful of raisins or sultanas, and giving everything a good mix with hands that know better than to question the recipe. The batter is heavy, sticky, and only slightly sweet, the colour of early dusk. Sometimes there's a glug of treacle or golden syrup, if the week's wages have stretched far enough. But no matter the add-ons, there's always suet, those pale, waxy nuggets of beef fat that melt into the mixture, giving the finished pudding a strange bounce and a satisfying heft. If you're lucky, someone's saved a bit of spice from Christmas to throw in, but most of the time, suet pudding is an exercise in getting through the cold months without running out of calories or willpower. The cooking process is as slow and unhurried as a foggy Sunday. The batter is poured or shaped into a basin, covered tightly with cloth or paper. and left to steam for hours over simmering water. The result is a dense, moist pudding that holds its shape with the determination of a brick wall. When it's finally unveiled, the room fills with a sweet, meaty aroma, equal parts comforting and mildly unsettling. Serving suet pudding is a family affair. Thick slices are cut and slapped into bowls, steaming hot and speckled with wrinkled fruit. A ladle of custard or a drizzle of golden syrup is the finishing touch. The first bite is chewy, deeply filling, and surprisingly complex. Sweet from the dried fruit, rich from the beef fat, and just earthy enough to remind you this is not a treat for the faint-hearted. Suet has a way of clinging to your mouth, coating each bite in a layer of nostalgia and slight confusion. It's dessert, but only just. In 1920s London, suet pudding was more than a sweet. It was a practical solution for hungry families. Flour, suet, and dried fruit were cheap, easy to store, and kept you going through cold winters and lean times. Grannies guarded their pudding secrets, passing them down the generations, each one swearing their method produced the fluffiest, most flavorful results. Some families added jam, others a splash of brandy if there was a reason to celebrate. But all agreed on one thing. You ate it hot, you ate it quickly, and you never, ever complained. Children either loved suet pudding or regarded it with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for dentists and unfamiliar vegetables. Adults appreciated the sheer staying power of the stuff. A dessert that doubled as a main course and would keep you full from tea time until breakfast. If there were leftovers, they were fried in slices the next day, crisp on the outside, soft in the middle, proving that even dessert could go another round in the ring. Compare suet pudding to today's desserts, and you're worlds away from mousse and meringue. There's no lightness, no fuss, no risk of it blowing away in a breeze. Suet pudding is dessert with substance, with backbone, with a hint of "I dare you." It's what you eat when you need to feel the calories settling in for the night, building a little wall against the winter chill. And as you finish your bowl, spoon clinking against the crockery, you realize suet pudding is more than just a recipe. It's a relic of survival, a testament to tough times, and a small, sticky reminder that dessert doesn't always have to make sense, so long as it makes you full. Thinly sliced boiled ox tongue was both an everyday sandwich filler and a centerpiece for special occasions. It's tender, it's mild, and it makes you question every bite. Step into a 1920s London kitchen, where practicality rules and every part of the animal is up for grabs. The morning is cold, the kettle's whistling, and there's a pot on the stove bubbling away with something that, at first glance, looks suspiciously like it might start talking back. Welcome to the world of boiled ox tongue, a dish that's as unnerving as it is surprisingly delicious. If you can get past the part where your dinner used to taste its own food, preparation begins with an ox tongue that's, frankly, hard to ignore. It's huge, heavy, and, if you're not careful, might just flop off the counter onto your shoes. You give it a good scrub, drop it into a pot with carrots, onions, celery, and a generous scattering of peppercorns. Some families toss in a bay leaf or two for good luck. The whole thing simmers for hours, the tongue slowly tenderizing until it's ready to be lifted from the pot. Steam billowing like a magician's trick gone slightly wrong. Peeling the tongue is an experience that deserves its own medal. Once it's cool enough to handle, you have to strip away the thick, bumpy outer skin, an oddly satisfying, slightly alarming process. What you're left with is a hunk of glossy, pale pink meat that looks entirely too much like what it is, sliced thin. The tongue reveals its secret. It's astonishingly tender, with a marbled, almost silky texture that makes it the softest muscle you'll ever eat. The first bite is, well, gentle. Boiled ox tongue is surprisingly mild, less beefy than roast. more refined than brisket, with a delicate, almost creamy mouthfeel. It's savory without being overwhelming, the kind of meat that's perfect for sandwiches, salads, or, if you're feeling extravagant, as the centerpiece for a fancy meal. Pair it with a dollop of English mustard, a slice of good bread, and you've got lunch that's more posh than practical. And yet, for all its understated flavor, ox tongue carries a reputation. Children often approached it with a mixture of awe and skepticism. You're sure it's not going to lick me? While adults enjoyed the nostalgia and the sense of thrift that came with using every part of the animal. On special occasions, weddings, holidays, or whenever the butcher had a deal, tongue would be sliced and fanned out on platters, garnished with parsley and hard-boiled eggs, a centerpiece as elegant as it was resourceful. For the everyday Londoner, though, ox tongue was mostly about economy. It was cheaper than prime cuts, lasted for days, and, when sandwiched between slices of rye with a smear of pickle, could transform the dreariest packed lunch into something worth looking forward to. Leftovers found their way into hash, pies, or even cold with a bit of salad cream on the side. Modern eaters might hesitate at the thought, but back then, nothing was wasted. Tongue was a lesson in culinary humility and practicality. If it's edible, you eat it. And if it's tasty, you tell everyone it was your plan all along. Plus, there's a certain satisfaction in serving a dish that still looks at you, metaphorically. From the plate, a little culinary drama to spice up the everyday routine. So as you finish your sandwich, savoring the softness and subtle flavor, you realize that some of the weirdest foods of the past were also the smartest. Boiled ox tongue, a dish that proves you can make anything taste good, as long as you don't overthink it. This steamed pudding dotted with raisins sounds like a medical diagnosis but tastes like nostalgia with extra custard. In the 1920s, it was the dessert equivalent of an inside joke. Let's step into a post-war London kitchen where the steam rising from the pudding basin doubles as both humidity and central heating. The children are snickering in the corner, the adults exchange knowing glances, and someone, inevitably, makes a joke about the name. Because Spotted Dick is a name you say with a straight face exactly once before dissolving into giggles. No matter how many generations of British stoicism are in your bloodline, the pudding itself is as humble as it is hearty. Flour. Suet, yes, more beef fat. It's the secret backbone of every self-respecting British dessert. Sugar, and a splash of milk, all mixed together with a handful of raisins or currants. The spots, in case you're wondering, are the dried fruits scattered through the dough, adding bursts of sweetness to every bite. It's all packed into a basin, wrapped up tight, and left to steam for what feels like forever. The anticipation builds, the kitchen warms, and soon the windows are fogged up enough to write your initials on. The unveiling is always a little underwhelming. The pudding is squat, beige, and, frankly, looks like it was designed by committee. But what it lacks in looks, it makes up for in comfort. Thick slices are served up piping hot, and always, with a generous ladle of custard. The custard seeps into the crevices, softening the already forgiving crumb, and turns each forkful into a taste of genuine, if slightly soggy, delight. The first bite is chewy, warm, and sweet. The suet gives the pudding its distinctive soft yet dense texture, and the raisins, somehow juicier than you'd expect, are little explosions of flavor in the otherwise mild dough. It's the kind of dessert that lulls you into a food-induced calm, the culinary equivalent of an old wool blanket. And unlike most modern desserts, you can actually feel it fortifying you against the next cold snap. But let's be honest, half the enjoyment of Spotted Dick comes from the ritual of it. The name alone sparks conversation, a round of laughter, and maybe a family story or two about the first time someone's gran tried to ask for it in a bakery without blushing. In the 1920s, Spotted Dick was both treat and tradition, a cheap, cheerful, and endlessly forgiving pudding that could stretch to feed a crowd and survive almost any ingredient substitution. No raisins? Use sultanas. No suet? Lard will do. No basin? Wrap it in cloth and hope for the best. Children might wrinkle their noses at the first sight, but after a few bites and a second helping of custard, they're hooked. Adults sigh contentedly, reminiscing about childhood Sundays or the rare occasion a bit of orange zest found its way into the mix. Leftovers, if any survive, are fried up for breakfast the next morning, proving once again that in a British kitchen, nothing goes to waste. Modern desserts might boast about being gluten-free, dairy-free, or calorie-free, but Spotted Dick is unapologetically old school. There's nothing free about it, except the way it warms your insides and loosens everyone's tongue around the table. It's dessert with a punchline and a backstory, as sturdy as it is silly. And so, as the laughter dies down, the custard thickens, and the last crumb is scraped from the bowl, you realize Spotted Dick is more than just a joke or a relic of British stubbornness. It's a dish that binds generations, one giggle and one spoonful at a time. A sausage made with blood, oats, and fat, black pudding was breakfast for those who liked their food with a side of existential crisis. Eat it, don't look at it, and whatever you do, don't Google the ingredients. Let's open the door to a 1920s London kitchen, where the morning air is thick with steam and the scent of something savoury, borderline alarming, sizzles in the pan. On the stove, black pudding is frying, crisping up at the edges, its inky circles hissing like they've got secrets. It's not for the faint-hearted or the squeamish. This is a breakfast built on the principle that if you're going to eat nose to tail, you might as well start with the part that makes even butchers look twice. The recipe for black pudding is about as simple as it is eyebrow-raising. Pig's blood, fresh and dark, mixed with steel, cut oats, suet, and a scattering of onions and spices. This slurry is poured into a sausage casing, boiled, cooled, then sliced for frying. What you end up with is a ring of sausage as dark as midnight and, depending on your courage, either a beloved comfort food or a culinary dare. The first bite is all about texture, crisp on the outside, soft and almost creamy on the inside, with bits of oat-lending chew and structure. The flavour, earthy, deeply savoury, with a minerally tang that's hard to describe but impossible to forget. There's richness from the fat, warmth from the spices, and a lingering irony, pun intended, that lets you know exactly what you're eating, even if you pretend not to. For many working-class families in London, black pudding was a breakfast staple. It was affordable, packed with calories and protein, and, crucially, nothing went to waste. The local butcher sold fresh rings every week, and the most thrifty households would make their own, turning kitchen scraps and the less popular bits of the animal into something sustaining, if not exactly glamorous. Kids approached black pudding with the same mixture of awe and suspicion as a schoolyard legend. Some would beg for crispy slices, dunked in brown sauce, or eaten between hunks of bread. Others, upon learning the truth about its origins, would quietly develop sudden allergies or try to trade it away at breakfast. Adults mostly just got on with it. Life in 1920s, London left little room for culinary pickiness. The beauty, or horror, of black pudding is in its honesty. There's no disguising the ingredient list. The blood gives the sausage its unmistakable colour and richness, and the oats stretch the mixture, soaking up the flavour and binding it together. Spices, black pepper, thyme, maybe a touch of allspice. Try valiantly to distract your taste buds, but in the end, the pudding is what it is. A dense, satisfying reminder that British cuisine is sometimes less about pleasure and more about practicality. Compare black pudding to today's breakfast options, smoothie bowls, overnight oats, vegan sausage, and it's a relic from a grittier, more resolute time. It's not interested in being pretty, or healthy, or polite. It's the culinary equivalent of waking up before dawn, putting on your boots, and facing the world with a little bit of courage and a lot of stubbornness. Still, there's a kind of pride in eating black pudding. It connects you to centuries of tradition, to the people who scraped and saved, who made something nourishing out of what others would throw away. And as you finish your breakfast, maybe with a fried egg on top or a puddle of beans, you feel fortified, slightly heroic, and just a little bit rebellious. Because in 1920s London, breakfast was less about flavour and more about fuel. And if you could eat black pudding with a straight face, you could handle anything the day or life threw at you. Pigeons weren't just city pests, they were dinner. Pigeon pie, filled with gamey meat and thick gravy, was hearty enough to fuel a dock worker. Feathers optional. Let's wander into the heart of a 1920s London kitchen, where practicality always takes precedence over presentation. The evening meal is underway. The window cracked open just enough to let in the smell of damp brick and the faint, insistent cooing of the birds that might soon find themselves under your fork. While modern Londoners see pigeons as sky rats, in the old days they were a perfectly respectable source of protein. If you could catch one, you could cook it. And nobody asked too many questions about where exactly your supper had come from. The making of pigeon pie starts at the butcher's, or, if times are tight, with a bit of entrepreneurial foraging around the city's squares. Once plucked and cleaned, a process that's equal parts patience and grim determination, the pigeons are jointed, their small but flavorful breasts and legs saved for the pie. The bones are simmered into a rich stock, filling the kitchen with the deep, slightly wild aroma that tells you this isn't just any bird. The filling comes together in a battered pot. Chopped onions, carrots, and maybe a handful of celery if it hasn't wilted beyond recognition. The pigeon meat is browned, tossed with flour, and then covered with stock and simmered until tender. The resulting gravy is dark and sticky, rich with the concentrated flavor of slow cooking and not a little mystery. If you're feeling flush, a splash of ale or a pinch of dried herbs is added. But even without embellishments, the result is a filling that's both luxurious and no nonsense. Next comes the pastry, a rough, sturdy crust that's as much about keeping the good stuff in as it is about flavor. Short crust or suet, whatever you've got, rolled out thick and pressed over the top of the pie dish, with a few artful slits to let out steam and hopefully keep the crust from exploding. Into the oven it goes, and as it bakes, the scent draws the family to the table, hungry and hopeful. When pigeon pie is served, it's a moment of genuine excitement. The crust is golden, the filling bubbling just underneath, and every serving is a generous wedge that steams in the chilly kitchen air. The first bite is unmistakable. Pigeon is not chicken, nor is it duck. The meat is dark, slightly gamey, and deeply savory, a flavor that says, I used to live in Trafalgar Square, and now I live here. The gravy clings to the meat and vegetables, turning each mouthful into a rich, rib-sticking treat that leaves no one wanting for seconds. Children are predictably wary at first. You're sure there aren't any feathers, but the allure of hot pie and the promise of dessert usually win them over. Adults reminisce about old recipes, about grandparents who could turn anything into pie, about times when a meal meant using everything you could find or afford. Pigeon pie is proof that ingenuity can turn even city wildlife into Sunday dinner. Modern foodies might clutch their pearls at the thought, but compared to the processed, factory-farmed chickens of today, wild pigeon is almost a delicacy. Lean, flavorful, and completely free-range, albeit with questionable dietary habits. In a city where nothing came easy, pigeon pie was a triumph of resourcefulness, a celebration of thrift, and, if you didn't overthink it, surprisingly delicious. So as you mop up the last streak of gravy with a piece of crust, you realize, in 1920s London, the only thing stranger than what people ate was how resourceful they became to make sure there was always something to eat. And sometimes that meant dinner looked back at you with tiny, beady eyes. Feathers optional, seconds encouraged. For London's poorest, a slice of bread smeared with treacle, thick, sticky syrup, was a dessert, a snack, and occasionally a bribe for good behaviour. Let's wander into a 1920s East End kitchen where the week's wages have barely stretched to Tuesday and every meal is a masterclass in creative budgeting. The cupboards are nearly bare. The only luxury, a battered tin of black treacle shoved at the very back of the shelf. The bread, a day past its prime, sits on the table looking as tired as everyone else in the room. But tonight, there's no grumbling. Not when the promise of something sweet is in the air. Treacle is not just any syrup, it's the denser, moodier cousin of golden. Syrup, thick as molasses and almost black, glinting under the kitchen lamp with the promise of a sugar rush and the threat of sticky fingers. For most Londoners, it's an occasional treat, a rarity to be rationed, hoarded, and fiercely guarded by every mum in the city. When it comes out, you know something's up. Either someone did their chores, got a good mark at school, or it's just been a very long, very hard day. The process is simple, almost ceremonial. You slice the bread, not the fluffy, cloud-like loaves of modern bakeries, but dense, chewy slabs that demand effort from your jaw. Sometimes you toast it over the fire for extra crunch. Sometimes you don't bother. You open the tin, dig out a glossy spoonful of treacle, and smear it thickly over the bread. The syrup oozes into every crevice, soaking in, turning the pale crumb a rich, sticky brown. If you're lucky, there's a scrape of margarine underneath for a bit of extra decadence. If not, nobody complains. This is a treat, and treats are not to be critiqued. The first bite is a sensory experience. The bread is sturdy, the treacle thick and almost chewy, clinging to your teeth and sending a bolt of dark sweetness straight to your brain. There's a bitterness to the treacle, almost burnt, balanced by an earthy depth that lingers on the tongue. It's not delicate or refined. This isn't the kind of sweet you'd find in a patisserie window, but it's deeply satisfying, a comfort that feels earned rather than bestowed. Kids adore it, or rather, they adore the idea of it, the ritual, the anticipation, the way a single slice can turn the end of the day into a minor celebration. Of course, treacle has a habit of turning every small child into a sticky, wild-eyed whirlwind. So parents sometimes save it for moments when they need to coax good behavior or just want a few minutes' peace. In some households, bread and treacle is the only sweet thing on offer. In others, it's the last resort, whipped out when even the jam jar is empty. For adults, it's nostalgia in edible form, a taste of childhood, of simpler, hungrier times. It's a reminder of evenings spent around the kitchen table, sharing stories, swapping crumbs, and licking syrup off your fingers while pretending you hadn't noticed the bread was a bit stale. Sometimes it was supper, sometimes dessert, sometimes just a way to quiet a grumbling belly before bed. Compare it to modern snacks and desserts. Brightly coloured, artificially flavoured, individually wrapped. And bread and treacle stands out for its honesty. It's just what it says. Bread, syrup, and the memory of a time when sugar was too precious to waste on anything less than pure, sticky joy. And as you scrape the last bit of treacle from your plate and look around the kitchen, you realize that sometimes the best comfort is the simplest. In 1920s London, luxury was rare, but a slice of bread and treacle could turn even the bleakest day into something a little bit sweeter. A cheap treat, a reward, and, in its way, a celebration of making do and making memories, one sticky bite at a time. Shellfish gathered from the Thames were boiled up with leeks and potatoes. Cockle soup was filling, slightly gritty, and made you grateful for every non-crunchy bite. Let's step into a 1920s London kitchen. The window fogged up with steam and the faint, briny smell of low tide. On the table sits a heavy pot, bubbling away as family members huddle around, hungry and hopeful. Tonight's supper is cockle soup, a dish that is equal parts seaside romance and questionable hygiene, depending on how well you trust the Thames. The recipe for cockle soup is simple, bordering on optimistic. You start with cockles, small, stubborn shellfish pried from the riverbanks or bought from a street vendor, their shells rattling in a paper bag. If you're lucky, they've been purged of most of their sand. If not, you're in for a surprise, or two. Into a big pot they go, along with chopped leeks, potatoes, maybe a bit of celery, and whatever herbs can be found growing between the cracks in the backyard. Water is added, the lid goes on, and everything simmers until the vegetables are tender and the cockles have opened up, releasing their salty, mineral-rich flavor into the broth. The aroma fills the kitchen, oceanic, earthy, and just a little bit wild. It's not a fancy soup. There's no cream, no butter, no wine, and certainly no crusty baguette on the side. This is a soup made for filling stomachs, not impressing guests. When it's time to eat, everyone gathers with bowls in hand, spoons poised. The first ladleful is always a little suspenseful. Will there be more potato than sand? Has the river gifted you a pearl? Or just an uninvited bit of Thames grit? You pick through the cockles, sucking the meat from the shells, the broth warming you right down to your toes. Occasionally you crunch down on something that makes you pause and reconsider your life choices. But you push on, because in 1920s London, you don't waste food. And besides, it builds character and possibly stronger teeth. The taste of cockle soup is deeply savory, with a bracing saltiness that only true shellfish can bring. The potatoes are soft and soak up the flavor, while the leeks add a gentle sweetness that tames the sea. Sometimes, if the soup has been simmering long enough, everything takes on a pleasant, silky texture, except for the odd bit of sand, which is more of a personality quirk than a flaw. Children either love it for its novelty or loathe it for the same reason. While adults quietly thank their lucky stars, it isn't bread and dripping again. For many families, cockle soup was more than a meal. It was a tradition, a reminder of summers spent at the seaside, or of relatives who made their living from the river's shifting bounty. Vendors in flat caps and aprons would sell cockles from barrows on the street, the call of fresh cockles ringing out as kids ran after, hoping for a taste. It was cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable, with recipes passed down and tweaked as needed by whatever was available. Compare it to today's seafood chowders and bisques, and cockle soup seems humble, even austere, but there's a charm to its simplicity, a sense that you're eating something real, something that connects you to the city and the river that fed it. No pretension, no fuss, just a hot meal, a warm kitchen, and the knowledge that, sand or no sand, you're part of a long line of Londoners who made the best of what they had. And as you reach the bottom of your bowl, grateful for every non-crunchy bite, you realize that sometimes comfort food isn't about perfection. Sometimes it's about tradition, togetherness, and finding satisfaction, even when there's a little bit of Thames between your teeth. Sometimes there wasn't much to go inside a pie, so you filled it with gravy, a few sad scraps of meat, and called it a meal. It's comfort food if you don't require substance. Let's step into a 1920s London home, where the day's fatigue clings to every surface and the pantry is down to its last few hopefuls. The kitchen is quiet except for the gentle hiss of the gas oven and the hum of hungry anticipation. Pie night is here. Well, pie in the most generous sense. Tonight's centerpiece is gravy pie, a dish that proves even the humblest ingredients can aspire to be something greater, or at least something filling. It begins with pastry, because in Britain, pastry is half the point. Short crust, if you're lucky, suet or dripping crust, if you're practical, and sometimes even a mash of leftover breadcrumbs, pressed together in a desperate act of carbohydrate wizardry. The base is rolled out and fitted into a tin, patching up the holes with the determination of a family on its third round of rationing. Now, for the filling. The meat is sparse, a few shreds of leftover beef or lamb, maybe a morsel of pork, sometimes just the pan drippings saved from Sunday's roast and thickened with flour to make a robust, dark gravy. The real star is the gravy itself. Deeply savory, glossy, and with enough onions, herbs, and seasoning to convince your tongue that something substantial is happening. Some cooks bulk it out with chunks of potato or turnip. A nod to nutrition, but no one is fooled. The goal is to stretch the memory of Sunday's dinner across as many days as possible. You pour the gravy and its meager bits into the pie shell. Cover it with a top crust, crimped firmly for morale, and into the oven it goes. The smell as it bakes is rich and meaty, warming the whole kitchen with promises the actual meal may not fully deliver. When it's done, you pull out a golden pie, bubbling gently at the edges, the crust crisp and inviting. Slicing into a gravy pie is a delicate operation. The filling, true to its name, is mostly liquid. So, the first wedge often slumps onto the plate in a small tidal wave of sauce. The pastry, slightly soggy underneath but beautifully flaky on top, does its best to contain the flow. Each serving is more like stew in a crust, spooned and mopped up with the help of a hunk of bread, or, if you're lucky, a scoop of mashed potato on the side. The taste is all comfort, warm, salty, savory. And, if you close your eyes, almost reminiscent of a meat pie from more prosperous times. The gravy coats everything in a silky, flavorful blanket, turning the leanest scraps into a meal worthy of thanks. Children dig in enthusiastically. Adults savor the warmth. And for a few moments, no one thinks about what tomorrow's dinner will, or won't, bring. Gravy pie isn't about opulence. It's about survival, resilience, and the magic of making do. It's the edible equivalent of a stiff upper lip. Simple, undemanding, and as filling to the spirit as it is to the stomach. In 1920s London, it wasn't about impressing guests or keeping up appearances. It was about gathering around the table and sharing what you had, gravy and all. Compare it to today's gourmet pies, stuffed to bursting with steak, ale, wild mushrooms, or truffles, and gravy pie seems almost defiant in its simplicity. But its charm lies in the honesty. No tricks, no frills, just the promise of a warm meal and the comfort of home, even when home is short on everything but heart. So, as you finish your plate, sopping up the last of the gravy with a crust that's seen better days, you realize sometimes the best meals aren't about what's inside the pie, but about what's inside the people who made it. In the end, gravy pie is proof that you can get through anything, one spoonful of liquid lunch at a time. The day's barely started, and already there's a silvery herring staring at you from a plate, pickled in vinegar and onions, until it's more acid than fish. Soused herring was the breakfast of champions, or at least of anyone determined to spend the rest of the day burping quietly in public. Each bite is sharp, tangy, and comes with the subtle threat of lingering on your breath well into tea time. Let's take a foggy step into a 1920s London kitchen. The air is thick with the aroma of last night's coal fire and the unmistakable tang of vinegar. On the table, gleaming on a chipped enamel plate, is your morning adversary, soused herring. The fish glistens in its pool of sour marinade, bits of translucent onion clinging to the skin like confetti at a particularly boisterous funeral. There's no toast to soften the blow, no gentle cup of coffee to round things off. Just you, the fish, and the promise of a breakfast you'll remember and taste all day long. Sousing is an old-school preservation trick, perfect for people who didn't have the luxury of refrigeration and liked their food to bite back. To make soused herring, the fish is cleaned and soaked in a bath of strong vinegar, sometimes with a little water, sugar, and a fistful of pickling spices, then boiled or gently poached until the flesh turns soft and tender. Slices of raw onion are added for extra kick, and the whole dish is left to cool, intensifying in both flavor and aroma as the hours pass. The first bite is an experience. The herring is firm, yet yielding. The sharpness of the vinegar immediately flooding your mouth and waking up every taste bud, whether it's ready or not. There's a saltiness from the sea, a faint hint of smoke or brine depending on how the fish was treated before it met the vinegar, and the bright zing of onion cutting through the richness. The aftertaste? Think seafood lightning bolt with a finish that lingers long enough for you to start regretting your life choices, or at least planning how to avoid close conversations at work. Soused herring is not a breakfast for the timid. It's the sort of meal that lets everyone in the room know you've already won the day. Children would eye it warily, adults would shrug and dig in, knowing that it was filling, cheap, and, most importantly, packed with the kind of protein and fat that made sure you could tackle whatever the city threw at you. And in London, you needed all the help you could get. Some households tried to tame the herring with a hunk of dense brown bread, maybe a pat of butter if the week's budget allowed. But for many, it was simply a fish and vinegar solo, washed down with strong tea. If you were lucky, someone had sliced a pickled beet on the side, offering a brief, earthy sweetness before the next forkful brought you right back to the briny deep. For those who grew up with it, soused herring is a badge of honor. It's proof you can handle strong flavors, strong opinions, and anything that might wander in off the Thames. For newcomers, it's a rite of passage. Survive your first serving, and you're officially a local, complete with the London lunchbox aroma that follows you until supper. Modern palates might recoil at the idea, but in the 1920s, soused herring was a practical luxury, a taste of the sea in the middle of the city, and a clever way to keep food fresh without an icebox. Plus, it was a wake-up call you didn't need to plug in. As you finished the last tangy bite, wiping vinegar from your chin, you realize something important. You may not have conquered the day yet, but you've certainly conquered breakfast. Soused herring is proof that the weirdest meals are sometimes the ones that make you feel toughest, proudest, and yes, just a little bit sour. Imagine butter, but richer, saltier, and somehow both fancier and more desperate. In 1920s London, bread and goose fat was a staple in Jewish and working-class communities. It's smooth, it's savory, and it's the reason you're wearing an extra scarf, inside and out. Good luck explaining to your cardiologist that this was just cultural. Let's step into a kitchen on a brisk winter morning, the wind rattling the single-pane windows, and the only thing between you and frostbite is a mug of hot tea and a plate of bread slathered with, what else? Goose fat. Forget margarine. Butter is an occasional luxury, used for holidays and very good news. Goose fat, on the other hand, is the spread of the everyman. The the glistening golden leftovers from Sunday's roast, carefully strained and poured into a jar, then doled out through the week like edible insulation. The bread itself is sturdy, often a 2-day-old rye or a heavy white loaf with the consistency of a doorstop. You take a thick slice, cut with the kind of dull knife that doubles as a makeshift hammer, and lay it out on the plate. Now for the star of the show. A generous scoop of goose fat, so smooth it could pass for a spread in a Parisian bistro. If you ignore the fact that it's being served in a house where the only French word spoken is croissant. And even then, just as a punchline, you spread the fat thickly, watching it soak into the bread and leave a sheen on your fingers that no amount of scrubbing will remove. Maybe there's a little salt sprinkled on top, or a scrape of garlic if you're feeling continental. But the truth is, you don't need much. Goose fat has a flavor all its own, unctuous, meaty, and impossibly satisfying. It's food that hugs you from the inside, a portable radiator you can eat. The first bite is pure comfort. The bread is chewy and dense. The goose fat melts on your tongue, coating your mouth in a silky layer that's both luxurious and just a touch alarming. There's a subtle sweetness from the fat, an undertone of roasted flavor, and a saltiness that makes you want to take another bite, and another, until you're convinced you could brave a snowstorm in nothing but a thin jumper. In Jewish homes, schmaltz, rendered goose or chicken fat, was a delicacy, often flavored with a pinch of onion or garlic and spread on challah for Friday night dinner. For London's working-class families, it was simply practicality. Waste nothing, eat everything, and never turn your nose up at free calories. Goose fat kept bellies full and bodies warm when both seemed like tall orders. In some houses, a little chopped crackling, the crispy bits left over from roasting, was mixed in for texture and a bit of salty crunch, a reward for the lucky, or for whoever snuck a taste while mum's back was turned. Modern eaters might blink at the sheer audacity of eating pure fat for breakfast or lunch. But in a world before dietary guidelines and statin prescriptions, it was common sense. Calories were precious, winter was relentless, and nobody had time to worry about cholesterol. If you could get through the day without shivering, you were already winning. Bread and goose fat is nostalgia on a plate, a relic of thrift and resilience. It's what you ate when you needed strength, when there wasn't enough butter, or when you just wanted to remember Sunday's roast one more time. And as you lick the last bit of fat from your fingers and reach for your scarf, you know that you're full, you're warm, and, just maybe, you understand why some traditions are worth keeping, even if your doctor doesn't agree. Officially called a soup, unofficially classified as a conspiracy, Brown Windsor was a gloopy brown concoction, beloved by Victorian hotels and still haunting London's kitchens in the 20s. Thickened with flour, meat scraps, and a suspiciously indestructible gravy base, it's less a soup and more a challenge to your cutlery. Picture yourself in a 1920s London dining room, the wallpaper yellowing with age and the cold seeping in through the gaps in the windows. The table is set, and from the kitchen comes a bowl of something that could generously be described as nutritious, and less generously as the aftermath of a plumbing accident. Brown Windsor soup lands on the table with a reassuringly heavy clunk. If it jiggles, you know the cook did it right. The recipe? Well, recipe is putting it kindly. Into the pot go meat trimmings, anything from beef shin to lamb's neck, together with diced carrots, onions, and turnips if they haven't gone too rubbery in the larder. A handful of barley for good measure, plus flour to thicken, and a hefty scoop of what Victorians called meat glaze, the essence of all things beefy, mysterious, and, if you ask too many questions, best left unnamed. Everything simmers for hours, melding into a consistency that hovers between hearty and structural. The colour is brown, not the rich, glossy brown of a modern consommé, but a stubborn, utilitarian brown. the kind that stains everything it touches and refuses to be photographed nicely. The aroma, on the other hand, is genuinely inviting. Deep, meaty, with an undertone of roasted vegetables and a distant memory of last week's Sunday lunch. A whiff of Worcestershire sauce or a Rogue Bay leaf might add some sophistication, but nobody's fooled. This is not soup to impress, but to endure. The first spoonful is thick, bordering on chewy. The meat is tender but indistinguishable from the vegetables, all of it blanketed by a rich, sticky gravy that clings to your spoon and your ribs. Every bite brings a medley of textures, a mushy bit of barley here, a stringy piece of beef there, and occasionally something that crunches in a way you weren't expecting. It's warming, filling, and, in large enough quantities, practically bulletproof. Brown Windsor soup was a staple in hotels, boarding houses, and anyone's home that could afford a bit of leftover meat and a lot of optimism. It had a reputation as a restorative, the sort of meal you served to the sick, the tired, or anyone who needed a reminder that things could always get denser. Some cooks added red wine or port for richness. Others simply added more flour and called it a day. Children faced with a steaming bowl of Brown Windsor either relished its stick to your guts qualities or developed lifelong trust issues with brown food. Adults, meanwhile, respected its ability to fill a belly, warm the bones, and make you forget, for a few hours at least, that most of your dinner was held together by flour and hope. Modern soups, clear, fresh, packed with vegetables and bright flavors, look like a different species next to Brown Windsor. Today, it would be called a one-pot meal, perhaps even rustic if you were feeling generous. But back then, it was just lunch. Honest, unpretentious, and impossible to spill on your lap, unless you had a chisel. So, as you polish off your bowl, you're left with a profound sense of fullness and a faint suspicion that you've just eaten something indestructible. In a world where survival sometimes meant eating whatever was left at the bottom of the pot, Brown Windsor soup was the friend you could always count on, even if you never quite figured out what was in it. So, as you settle deeper into your bed, maybe with a grateful sigh and the soft whir of a fan, take a moment to reflect on just how far we've come. Tonight, you survived a journey through 1920s London. A world of wobbly eels, dripping sandwiches, and more mystery meats than a county fair hot dog stand. You braved the breakfast table, made eye contact with a boiled sheep's head, and learned that sometimes dessert is just bread with sadness on top. But here's the thing, those Londoners, your great-grandparents maybe, or just some stubborn strangers from the past, ate every last bite with a resilience that's honestly hard to imagine. They turned leftovers into lunch, transformed scraps into comfort food, and somehow kept smiling even as their soup stared right back at them. Sure, their meals might have been weird, wobbly, or just plain questionable, but they made it work. Not just because they had to, but because that's what people do, find laughter and warmth even in the strangest dinners. So tonight, as you drift off in a clean bed, with snacks that don't jiggle and water that won't bite back, maybe give a quiet thanks to the culinary survivors of history, the ones who faced cold winters, rationing, and the persistent threat of lard in unexpected places, and who still found room for pudding at the end of the meal. History's menu was sometimes gross, sometimes terrifying, and often hilarious. But it's proof that people are stubborn, creative, and wonderfully ridiculous. If they could face down a plate of potted meat and still tell a good joke, you can handle whatever tomorrow brings. Rest easy, knowing that you're part of a long line of eaters, dreamers, and midnight snackers, people who always found a way to make it through. Good night.